depression or GAD or other things. There are like these other types of all-encompassing moods or vibes or feelings, and they happen before you ever think. They are all-encompassing at like this core level that rocks you before you can ever have a thought about it. Anytime you wake up and you feel a little bit off and you're like, oh, is this about to be a thing again? It's not like a thing that I can think my way out of. It's not like, okay, well, this is silly, blah, blah, blah. You're thinking on like this upper level. It's like trying to run a program to change your operating system. Like whatever is going on.
Norm MacDonald, he passed away.
Yeah, he did.
And it was like kind of a surprise to everybody. Apparently he had kept it a secret. We read an article that made it out like he kept it a secret from everybody, including his family. We had an interesting discussion about the obligation a person has to communicate with their family that they're, dying of cancer, or that they have cancer, or some other like fatal illness or something. And the entitlement people have to know, I guess the flip side of that, the entitlement people have to know whether or not their loved ones are like concealing information about a fatal disease they have. I landed pretty squarely on the side that like, I didn't want to be reductive, but, I guess in terms of if you've made a contract with somebody, like a significant other, or if you have a child or someone where, you've made the decision consciously that somebody is going to be dependent on you financially, then in that case, there's probably an obligation.
For sure.
But other than that, I pretty squarely believe that, that nobody's really entitled to, knowledge or information about anybody else to satisfy their own emotional well-being or something like that.
I would say it all comes down to your existing obligations, basically. Yeah. So if you run a business and you've got a bunch of employees that are going to get f***ed, or if you're, a parent and you've got a child that is still dependent on you, then yeah, for sure.
Interesting. I feel like there's got to be more to it than that. I'm pretty satisfied with that. It made a lot of people uncomfortable though, and I guess there's one parallel that I made to it. Somebody mentioned something like, the role of responsibility. There's a member of my community that's German that talks about this being a uniquely American problem, that this is like highly individualistic. We had a conversation about how this leads to things like anti-vaxxing and whatnot, and whether or not there's... Go ahead.
How does it lead to anti-vaxxing?
Well, this is actually a parallel that I made. I think individualism, like rampant individualism or staunch individualism, leads to anti-vaxxing, right? That's basically the core of the concept of what makes like the anti-vax movement attractive to people. You can't tell me what to do.
Yeah, but I disagree that it's individualism. I think it's anti-establishment. But I think that anti-establishment is still as much like a tribal cultish thing forever. I don't actually believe much in individualism. I don't think that one person would stand against a crowd of 1,000 people not getting vaccinated, but I think 100 people would. I think you still need a group of people to identify with. Nobody wants to be I think it's like it's an intrinsic quintessential part of the human experience is to not want to feel like you're an outsider or that you stand against everybody else. I think there's a lot of things that people call individualism or whatever, but I think capitalism is a really good lens to view that through, right? What does it mean to be an individual? It really means to be at the top of what is the most safest and socially acceptable thing to be, right? It's how do you show that you're the best type of person when it comes to clothes or cars? It's not to have the craziest piece of clothing or the craziest car. It's to have what is the best of the most acceptable, most normal things that you can have to signal to everybody else that you're the best member of a group, but goddamn, you're still in that group, and everybody's giving value to the things that are in that group. That's how I view it. But
really interesting. Well, I mean, is this how you view the world? Or are these concepts you see value in, or is this just the way that you interpret the way that most people interact?
I think that most people, I think almost everybody, I think that a fundamental part of how humans associate with the world is by getting acceptance from other humans. I think that's probably the most important part of the human experience, and I think that a lot of bad things come from that. So, for instance, if you have people in your life that are tearing you down, it can ruin your entire life if this happens at an early age. And I think there are positive things that come about that. People around you that support you and love and care for you, can bolster you at an early age, and you can end up growing to be a really self-reliant person. But yeah, I think that a lot of problems, good things, bad things, and good things stem from that sense of needing to be needing to get affirmation from other people around you. I think is really important, that acceptance thing.
Yeah, in general, I tend to agree generally. And I think I'm personally at an impasse where I feel I don't feel like I naturally succumb to those pressures to the degree that I think the average person does. I'm a little bit of a Sigma male. I don't know about yourself. You strike me as a bit of a Sigma male. But like, I guess I'm curious, how well do you see yourself conforming to those pressures as compared to the average person?
I mean, I don't think I do at all, but I think that there's a lot of parts of like the normal human experience that I'm completely disconnected from. Now, a lot of people will say that, but I think I've lived that well enough that like my record speaks for itself. I think that there are good and bad things to how we associate with other people. And so there are a lot of like normal experiences that people have, maybe like more like intimate or like emotionally intimate experiences that I just miss out on because I just don't feel things that way. So I think that there's like pros and cons to everything, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would say that I'm pretty emotionally detached, or I'm pretty like independent from like other people's viewpoints of me and whatnot. But it's helped me a lot, obviously, in this industry and with what I do. So.
Interesting. I guess I'm surprised to hear that you consider this to be, that you consider this from both aspects, the way that it helps you and the way that it hurts you, and that it seems to be like pretty even.
Yeah, that's because I'm 32. If you would have asked me when I was 22, I would have said that my way of processing the world is superior. Everybody else is weak-minded and stupid because they're too emotional and they let everybody else fuck their lives out. But that's a younger, dumber me or whatever. I think it's better to look at other people as different rather than like better or worse, because almost everything in life has like a pro and a con. And it's very silly to assume that some things are just, I mean, like there are a few fundamental things, right? Like eat healthy or like get enough sleep. But like outside of that, like almost everything has a plus side and a con side.
Wow. You were a centrist after all. Man after my own heart.
Wow.
No, I guess what I mean by that is I'm surprised to hear that you consider, I guess, the ways that you can be sort of emotionally detached as being a thing that can protect you from suffering like emotional pain or whatever. Especially in cases like this and death, I can attest personally when it comes to like the topic of death. I don't know what it is. I've been blessed with this ability to just completely detach myself from it. I just skip past the 5 stages and go straight to acceptance. I just understand the futility of bargaining with it. It sounds like you are similar in that way. I don't know how you handle death, or if you've had to like interface with it in your life, but it sounds like the way that you report it, that it also presents equal problems in your ability to like have intimate interactions and relationships with people. And I don't think I experienced that. Was that what you were, I guess, describing, or?
I mean, so this is hard for me. This is something I've thought a lot about over the past few years. So personally, I don't feel like I'm missing anything because I feel incredibly happy and fulfilled in all of my life. But I guess like upon further reflection, it's kind of hard to know. Maybe there are some, because like I see the way that other people emotionally connect to people, and I see the way that I'm able to connect to people when I'm on drugs is like incredibly exaggerated. So I mean, it is possible that there's something I missed there, but I wouldn't make the trade-off personally. But I guess it's kind of like, I use this as an analogy. It's a little bit weird, but it's kind of like, imagine like a person that's never had an orgasm in their entire life, and you ask them like, do you want to be able to have an orgasm? And it's like, well, let's think for a second. Like a lot of people waste time masturbating. A lot of people do dumb shit to like fuck people. Like there's STDs. Like there's so much more you can do in your life than waste time on that. So like if a person's never had an orgasm, why would they want one, right? But like they also don't know what they're missing. So I view like those types of connections like that, I guess. And that maybe it might be like some really grand, great thing that I'm missing and I just don't realize it. But I mean, right now everything is working really, really well in my life with the way that I am.
Interesting. I kind of wanted to get back to the norm conversation, but this is really interesting, and I am like really curious about your thought processes and stuff. Because I've gotten the sense, I've watched your content a bit. I've gotten the sense that you and I are like pretty similar in terms of, I call it like emotional security and just understanding that we're not like entitled to other people's attention or, anything like that. And kind of maintaining that for ourselves as well. And like trying to communicate that directly to other people. And it's funny, I feel like there are people on this platform that try to project and try to posit like emotional strength and security that end up like really sabotaging and betraying themselves, with their, the way that they talk about relationships and whatnot, like that infrared guy or like
the problem is like that confidence, like arrogance and crippling insecurity can both masquerade as incredible confidence. Because outwardly they can have similar types of presentations. And I think sometimes people will look at confident people and they'll be like, oh, wow, like this person, laughs off problems, or this person comes across as like cold and detached and like anime, and that's so cool. Yeah. And so now they don't have like the inner process to drive that outward process. So instead, their inside is a mess, but they try to bite the appearance or the aesthetic of it, and then they'll wear that for a little bit until they run into their first problem, and then they crash and burn. I've talked to so many people that outwardly seem like this, but they're just destroyed on the inside. Not to talk shit on anybody, but like Zerka and I think Haas are really good examples of this, that outwardly have that very masculine, very alpha, very confident demeanor, but like internally they're a wreck. Yeah.
Or even externally, they just don't understand how what they say betrays their message about like being emotionally secure.
Oh, sure.
I think there was one of the first conversations, I think the very first conversation you had with the two of them, you know, Haas was like, you know, I never cared about height. Height never bothered me. Height was never a problem for me. You know why? Because I'm still the biggest guy in the room. I'm 5'10". I'm 250 pounds. Like, it's clear that he's still making this calculation based on size, and that this is a thing that's like really present in his mind.
A really funny example of this is I point this out a lot. When you look at like kind of like the incel or the red pill crowd, the red pill or the PUA crowd, not all of them. I want to be clear on that. There are like some pickup advice and like red pill people that aren't crazy, but my favorite contradiction for some of these people is how quick they are to talk about like how worthless women are. You know, these bimbo Stacy fucks that hop on cock carousels and blah blah blah, fuck them all, and they're very quick to like throw all of them outside, to disregard all of them. But at the end of the day, like when you find out, well, how do you measure your value? How do you measure your self-worth? All of their advice is geared towards getting as many women to like them as possible. So they have this weird love-hate relationship with women where they want to constantly deride them and degrade them and say that they're worthless. But like, oh my God, please, I need women to like me, and I'm going to go and read all these tips and tricks on how to do it, right? So it's this weird, like, it's this weird dance where it's like, I don't know what you, there's like that internal contradiction always, that dissonance.
I've gotten that feeling from like, I don't want to generalize either, because I have a lot of sympathy, because, you know, I've been a teenager that was like hungry for, for female attention and wanting to validate myself that way. And
sure,
I know what kind of pain it causes people, but like I've gotten that read from the MGTOW people as well, where they're, it's like, yeah, it's right, I'm going my own way and I'm never looking back. And they're like looking over their shoulder the whole time.
Make sure people are paying attention.
Are you watching me walk away? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do we like, I guess I've always been curious, like, I'm really weary about generating any advice to, like, you and I are kind of sitting here on our high horses identifying these things that are causing pain for other people and feeling like, and talking about it in a way that suggests like, man, it must suck to be this way. But like, sometimes I think about maybe putting together, I don't know, like some coursework or something like that, but it just would make me feel like a snake oil salesman. I feel like there's no way to ride that line to help like impart the way that I interpret the world, or some things that have been helpful for me in like my personal growth to keep me from those pitfalls without feeling like, like I'm a huckster or something.
I think
do you ever have this problem?
I used to give a lot of advice on a lot of things, but something that I realized is that it's really hard. Have you ever heard of the expression "a just so" story?
No, go for it.
So you know what this is, even if you haven't heard that term. I know you know this. So a just so story is, well, you worked in intelligence, so you definitely know this. A just so story is we go into a room and we find a collection of facts, and then we create a story that suits those facts. Now, technically, we have no fucking idea if the story is real or not. We have no direct proof of that. So let's say I walk into a room, I see a guy like shaking in the corner, his hands are bloody, there's another guy laying on the floor, he's got a knife in him, it's like he's leaking blood or whatever, right? Now, I can put together a story and say like, I came in here, I think that guy stabbed that dude. But I don't really know, right? Theoretically, there's hey, Hot Chubby, thanks for the raid. Theoretically, there's like there's an infinite number of possibilities for what could have happened. Somebody else could have been in here and done it. Somebody could have done it, jumped out the window. There's like a million, maybe the guy fell on a knife and the guy tried to take it out, right? We don't know.
Sure. You can induce links between pieces of information.
So
right.
One problem that I realized, and it took me a long time, like again, until my 30s to realize this, is I would give a lot of advice. And I think in my early 20s and mid 20s, I gave myself a lot of credit for the type of person that I am. So I'd be like, okay, well, I'm really confident because I did these things early in life. And, I don't care about these things because I care about this and blah, blah, blah. And I'd give myself a lot of confidence for the type of, I give myself a lot of credit for the type of person I am. But I think looking back, if I'm being honest, it's really actually really hard to tell, like, why are you the way you are? Like, it might be the case that I am the way I am because when I was 4, like, somebody helped me walk a certain way and maybe I learned it. Or like when I was 6, like I fell off a bike and that actually shaped me way more than I ever thought, right? I don't actually know. So when I give advice for people, I can never give advice on like this really outer layer of the onion. So for instance, somebody says like, hey, like I have a really toxic relationship, like what should I do? I'm like, fucking leave, duh. Why the fuck would you waste your time? Now, because when I give advice like that advice works for somebody like me, Or I'll even be more extreme. I used to say this all the time. People are like, I have a really toxic relationship with my mother and father. I don't know what to do. I say, it's just fucking family. Who cares? Cut them out of your life forever. Why the fuck would you ever talk to this person? Who cares if you're fucking mom or dad? But then like I realized later on, it's like, okay, well, hold on. Not everybody processes things like me. Not everybody approaches things the same way as me. And I don't even really truly know why I do it. So I guess instead I have to like back up and give kind of either more generalized advice, like, hey, try not to let other people influence you as much, or try not to let other people's opinions or negative opinions mean that much to you unless you care about them. But at the end of the day, even generalized advice like that is kind of meaningless because people have to take that and make a deliberate effort to work on it. Like if you could just tell somebody, hey, don't let people's opinions negatively affect you if these people don't mean much to you. If you could just say that, somebody would do it. I mean, like everybody would be way better off for it. But that's a really hard thing to do if it's not something that you're already doing by the time you're like 15, 16, 17, you know?
I'm not terribly sure about that because, well, whatever, the exact age where that can occur or no longer occur, where it becomes more difficult is, I guess, a topic for another discussion that I'm not ready to substantiate anyway, but
sure. I'm really, just as a reference, I'm really kind of black pill on that. I feel like a lot of your big personality pegs, in my opinion, are kind of like in place by your late teens. And it seems to me like those are really hard to move. Like people that hit like 25 as a certain personality type and then dramatically shift, that seems to be an incredibly rare thing. Like it requires like a near death experience or like some tragedy generally. But not to say that it's impossible. It's just really, really, really hard at that point. But go ahead. Or that's funny because my opinion. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess like to relay my experience to contrast a little bit, I feel like every couple of years I think about the couple of years prior and I can like sort of, recount substantial ways that I was different or that I thought differently about things or the way that I, spoke to people or treated people or even considered them in our relationships and, what my obligations to them would or wouldn't be. And specifically, I think once upon a time I could have been, or maybe, I don't think there was a term for this, and there wasn't very much of a speaking market for this, but like a red pillar or something like that.
I feel like I'm outpaced
throughout my teens, I felt like I was teetering on that. But it wasn't until I was about, 23 or 24, which I guess is still under that 25 mark, but I had like a pretty big revolution personally about obligations, like a person's obligation to satisfy your emotional needs and stuff. And, that helped that culminated into, the sort of island that I can be now, which is nice. But that did occur later in life, and this has only been, I guess, solidified since. But even then, I've backtracked a little bit to be more amenable to like other people's, people that are close to me, their emotional needs and whatnot. I don't know. I feel like I'm moving on this sort of stuff pretty consistently throughout life.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like, I think that I agree in such that, like, I think you can still kind of like grow and stuff. But like, so I've changed significantly over the past 10 years, but there are like core aspects of my personality that have been completely unchanged. So like, for instance, I used to be way, way, way more arrogant and like conceited about my personality type and everything. I would see other people as kind of like beneath me or less than me or dumb or insignificant or just like
vulnerable
inferior.
And weak or
yeah, basically, yeah. Through my early and mid 20s, absolutely. But I think that my view on that like radically shifted into my like mid late to late 20s and then now my early 30s, where I try to view things as like different rather than like worse. But I don't think that was like a rearrangement of any like core personality trait of mine. It was just more kind of like a getting older, getting more experience kind of thing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Interesting.
But I guess I'd have to think a lot about like what do I consider like core personality traits versus like just like outwardly things that you can kind of change more. Yeah.
I think I would need some examples to really understand this really well, but we don't have to get into it now.
Okay.
To go back to the thought experiment about the obligation for you to tell people about whether or not you have cancer, there's this really great interview that's making the rounds on YouTube right now because it's relevant about Norm MacDonald. He had a podcast with somebody, or he had an interview with somebody, and it seemed that he was foreshadowing the way that he was planning on going out. He talks about some old actor, I can't remember, but he used to be a stuntman and then he became an actor and he performed what's called the stuntman's death, where he committed suicide by shotgun to the face. Jesus. Went out like Cobain. And, it had turned out that this guy had been diagnosed with cancer, and instead of putting his family through it and being expected to ride through it or whatever, he just decided to go out then and there, and he left the family behind.
Something that I will say in relation to this that I think is really important is I think the age of your family is very relevant here when we have this conversation. So like, for instance, if you have like kids that are like under 18 and shit, I think your obligations there are substantially different. Wait, this didn't do anything. Sorry. I think that your obligations are substantially different than if you have kids that are like in their 30s,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure about that. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's where I guess in terms of any moral prescriptions I would make, you know, first off, it's easy for me to make moral prescriptions about what to do when you're diagnosed with cancer while I'm sitting here healthy in my fucking chair, you know, like I don't know, you know, but it, you know, I guess if we're going to litigate like the obligations, yeah, it seems like that's really the only relevant factor I think is like how dependent they are on you, really.
Yeah, for sure.
You ever think about death?
Yeah, I used to have a lot of problems after I did a lot of psychedelic drugs, and then for a while, I'd say for a few months, it was something that super bothered me. There was like a whole bunch of problems related to like existence and consciousness and death that like bothered me on an emotional level for a long time.
It sounds like you've made a lot of progress since then.
I'd like to say so, but I think that at least when it comes to like really big psychedelic experiences, it seems like the thing that helps the most, actually, and this is true with a lot of human suffering, just putting a lot of time between me and the event, and then like more time goes on, things kind of settle in kind of organically. I guess there's like a little bit of deliberate thought there, but definitely the time aspect I think helped a lot.
But you had a moment of panic or like a period, I guess?
Yeah, for sure, where there was just like a lot of like very unsettling thoughts, yeah.
What happened?
I did like, I wanted to try, so I had smoked weed and eaten edibles a few times, and I was like, yeah, okay, this is like whatever. And then people said that like mushrooms, they're like, oh, you should try mushrooms, like it'll be a crazy experience, like have an ego death. And I was like, okay. And I did way too much for a first timer, and I went from no psychedelic experience in my entire life to having like the most extreme ego death that I still to this day ever experienced. And it took me like I think over a year probably to let that like settle in, because I've never had like my like reality fucked with so hard before.
And that ego death kind of resulted in you having an existential crisis about like, you know, your actual death and your actual like presence in the world or whatever, or what?
I feel like
I think that like I think that the worry about death stemmed from oh fuck. So basically, okay, wait, hold on, real quick. Have you ever done any type of like psychedelic?
No, just weed.
Okay.
I've never done shrooms.
You have like this kind of like fundamental processing of the world in terms of like how you experience things. That word doesn't mean anything if you've never fucked with your experience a lot, but like you have an experience on a day-to-day basis, and if you do a lot of a certain type of drug, it can alter that experience and like kind of make you take a step back and look at it. And I had never done that before, so there's a so here's like something I can tell you, right? You don't technically know that any of the external world is real. You don't really know that. You just kind of like trust your senses to convey that information to you, and then you kind of trust that your brain is putting together an accurate picture of the outside. There's a difference between like knowing that on an intellectual level and then doing a lot of drugs and fucking with your shit and then feeling that on like an emotional level. And then so going back into the real world and then kind of like wondering like, okay, well, doing a psychedelic experience is weird. Like, it fucks with your perception of time. Like, you're in a whole other kind of, like, reality. Like, that reality, when you're there, feels just as real as this one. There is no, like, you can't tell, like, oh, yeah, this is fake. It'll be over really soon. Like, that on a really high dose, it's really hard to tell. And then, like, then you kind of wonder about other states of consciousness, too. So, for instance, like, when you go to sleep, like, what the fuck is happening? Like, are you, like, if I lay down to sleep tonight, am I actually dying and then somebody else is waking up tomorrow and inheriting all my memories? Is that what I did this morning? Like, did somebody die last night in my bed and then I woke up and I inherited it? Because how would I really know if my consciousness was continuing from one point to another? Like, a whole bunch of peripheral thoughts kind of like that popped up, and then I just get, like, really paranoid about, like, going
real
to sleep
quick, I want to put a pin in this.
Yeah, go.
Because I remember there being a video, or I remember I was talking to somebody in private and they mentioned that you had been talking about this just in passing.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically it was some thought experiment about like if there was like a Star Trek transporter accident and there were two of you and one of you had to die, or the what would happen, the fate of that other you or something like that, and that this is, I guess, this was part of like the fucking orchestra of fears and like existential panic that you had over, you know, this experience. Does that sound accurate? Or
yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
My like initial interpretation of that is that like, oh, well, you would never take the teleporter because you would die. But now I realize that the obvious answer is, oh, you would always take the teleporter because it's the same thing as going to sleep, which is kind of like a weird thing to emotionally get over. But yeah.
Interesting. So what I wanted to ask you about was like, why does this make you uncomfortable? The thought that like your consciousness, that you may be like in some way mechanically a new person, even if you can or can't tell the difference. And I guess what I'm curious about is like, I mean, I'm sure at some point you ask yourself, well, what's the difference?
Yeah, so this actually, I figured this out in another really big trip secondly, because I wondered for a while, like, why did I care? Because I never seemed to really care about dying before. Like, it was never like a thing I ever worried about. it's kind of a strange thing, but I think that the idea that, and I don't know if this is the same for everybody, this might just be incredibly personal to me, the idea that everything in life can be like fabricated and that you're just kind of like a person stuck in your own mind is really, really bad, because it means there are no other people that you can interact with. And I think that idea of like being in a universe completely alone, I think is like at its very core, like very frightening to me. Like I don't like that idea. Like it's really hard to overcome.
Well, what is real? I mean, how would you even know the difference, right? Like if it's as good as real, if the people you're interacting with, whether or not it sounds like you're describing solipsism, basically, hard solipsism, or
exactly,
like liberating the bad thing. Okay.
Yeah, and I can, I'm super not trying to gatekeep, because I would say the exact same thing. Sure. So the thing is like, and that's what I would think before I'm trying to draw a distinction between an intellectual level and an emotional level. So intellectually, you don't really know what an expert, right? You have no idea, right? But I think that there's a difference between intellectualizing that but then feeling that. And until I did a lot of drugs, I never had the feeling before. Because like I can say, and this is something else that I noticed too, is there's like, I used to give a lot more credit to kind of like what you thought about, and I didn't realize like how much was going on under the hood. And there's a lot more going on down there that I have to give credit for, rather than just like my own like what I can think of right now, like my own cognitive thought process or whatever. There's a really, I can say all day long, like we can be sitting across and like, oh, you might not be real, lol, this coffee might not be real, oh, lol. And I kind of like joke about it, and I can entertain the thought, but I don't really feel that. I don't function that way. Like I really go through life assuming that other people are real and all that. Like I'm not gonna like drive off the road thinking my car will fly, or like jump off a building like thinking like, oh, who cares, lol. Like on my emotional core, I really do feel like there's other people out there and everything is real. And to shake that foundational belief emotionally is very difficult for me.
Do you think maybe the core of what caused that panic, or why it was so like frightful for you, was because it kind of like helped you entertain the possibility that there might be like a glitch and that it might end or something, that maybe one morning you wouldn't inherit the memories of yesterday's you or whatever? Oh
yeah, kind of. Or like every time you go to sleep, you basically just get thrown into some other dimension, and then somebody else wakes up and you're like, fucked, and now you're trapped in this other place forever or something.
Damn. That's really interesting. I can really only imagine. Like, it seems like an experience I'd have to really understand that fear.
Yeah.
So while you were having this fear, was it one of those things where you recognized that it was kind of irrational, or were you just like looking for some light in the darkness, or?
Yeah. So like, this is another huge problem. Up until my mushroom trip, I would still say to this day now for sure, I am super level with my thoughts and my emotions. Like I don't deal with any depression or any mental bullshit or anything ever. And even I even felt like before I did like a big mushroom trip, even if I ever did have like depression or like borderline or bipolar, whatever, like I'm a pretty reasonable person. I feel like I'll figure it out. Like I can think of ways to cope or whatever. After doing mushrooms, and then after falling in and out of some very, very weird states, this goes back to what I said before, to where there is a lot going on under the hood that is actually completely and totally inaccessible to me. And if stuff down there is fucked up, there's no amount of like rational thought. This is something that's really hard to explain too, and I wish I had better words for it. But I feel like to emotionally and mentally healthy people, there's like a pool of emotions that are available to you. But when you wander outside of that and you get into things like depression or GAD or other things, there are like these other types of all-encompassing moods or vibes or feelings, and they happen before you ever think. And they are all-encompassing at like this core level that rots you before you can ever have a thought about it. So it's hard to explain, but like if I was feeling like I woke up, and once you've had one of these feelings ever, like sometimes anytime you wake up and you feel a little bit off and you're like, oh fuck, is this about to be a thing again? It's not like a thing that I can think my way out of. It's not like, okay, well this is silly, blah blah blah, because like you're thinking on like this upper level. It's like a program you're running.
You'll try though.
But you can try, but it's like trying to run a program to change your operating system. Like whatever is going on down there is at a way more fundamental level that it seems like inaccessible to your immediate thoughts. Sorry, yeah, okay, I'm giving word answers, but yeah.
No, it's interesting, and like I guess immediately this evokes the idea of, I used to have some discomfort about like physics and particle physics and like subatomic physics and like quantum physics and stuff, and the idea where matter and mass at its absolute base level, it seems like the further down we go, the harder it is to even like see that it's there or interact or interface with it, and it's kind of all intellectual at that level. and it makes me think of fucking, like Grand Theft Auto 4. I remember I was playing Grand Theft Auto 4 at one point, and that game, for whatever reason, I had this thought first, playing this game, like the main character Nico Bellic's shadows are like, they use some algorithm to like soften his shadows, and it's like kind of dot matrix like. It's kind of bits and pieces all over the wall. And I started thinking like, this is kind of similar to particle physics. Like if you gave Nico Bellic a microscope, he would see that there's resolution, that there's like floating point algorithms that are causing these shadows to break down at a certain scale beyond where they're being projected from. And it's kind of scary to me to think about how similar this might be to like real world, the real nature of reality, the actual plane of existence we live in, to the degree that we're able to like describe it.
Yeah.
And I guess like that's what this concept evokes about what's going on under the hood. That like our top level consciousness is just really just patchwork, like makeshift, here to just get the job done and just make sense, make order out of like the chaos.
Like, the worst thing too is that if we take like our Darwinian understanding of like evolution and everything, and we have like an understanding of like how organisms evolve and succeed or whatever, it's really foolish to assume that our senses like necessarily convey reality to us, because our job is just to survive, right? And it might be the case that there might be stuff that can be perceived, and the perception of those things is actually like a disadvantage. And if that was the case, then like organisms would evolve and change to not perceive certain things. So there might be like sensory organs that we don't have because they're like parts of the universe that are just completely and totally inaccessible to us, which is also something that's kind of like hard to imagine. Like it seems like, well, we'd probably generally want to be able to perceive as much of reality as possible, but maybe not. Maybe there are, like there are a lot of organisms on this planet whose eyes can only see a certain few colors. They don't have ears. They're missing senses.
You ever see Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson?
I have not.
Oh, I think you'd love it. It's one of the greatest, I think, like edutainment spectacles I've ever seen. It's a really great example of somebody who's like actually a lecturer and like a professor, an expert in a field, Neil deGrasse Tyson, talking about his wheelhouse with a lot of money behind him to make it like a really entertaining spectacle. And the best thing that this series does, it's the best thing Seth MacFarlane, we can thank Seth MacFarlane for it. For whatever other reasons you might not like the guy, this is one thing that I think one of his greatest triumphs is that he funded this.
Okay.
And one of the best things that this series does is explain astronomical and like physical phenomena rather, with a lot of great visualizations to help you like really conceptualize these concepts. And there's this really great visual where they describe, a little boy runs up and pokes this little girl in the cheek, and the dad starts looking all pissed off at the little boy. He's gonna beat the little kid's ass. He's much bigger and stronger. Little kid's a little bitch. And Neil deGrasse Tyson steps in and he goes, "Hold on, Dad. He didn't really touch her." Whenever you're actually making contact with something, the actual matter is infinitesimal in size. If you actually took the actual matter of your hand and the desk in front of you or the table in front of you or whatever, there's like if the magnetic forces that keep your hand from going through it weren't present, it would the odds that any matter in your hand would collide, intersect or collide. It's incredibly slim, and that it's all really just what keeps them from going through each other is this like network of magnetic fields. That shit, I guess that's similar, right?
Yeah, it's really similar to like the universe, right? Like two galaxies passing through each other. If gravity didn't exist, I think the odds of anything actually colliding are incredibly small, because the vast majority of it is empty space, which seems like impossible, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I got.
Wait, so where did you end up? So for the Norm Macdonald thing, obviously you don't think he has like any obligation?
I mean, as long as he hasn't entered a social contract with somebody to provide for them, and like they're continuing, sustenance or whatever, their continuing livelihood, then yeah, I don't think there's any obligation. I think a person, especially when it comes to cancer, like this guy was diagnosed with cancer like a decade ago. The idea, there was a lot of back and forth in chat about this. And I held pretty firmly that, ultimately I think it's up to the individual. If nobody's dependent on you, Norm is survived by his like son who's 30 something, late 20s or early 30s, or maybe even late 30s. Turns out he hasn't been married for like 25 years or something like that. I think death is like a really personal thing. And the way Norm Macdonald talks about it, he talks about this guy who commits, or who suffers what he calls the stuntman's death. He talks about him as like a courageous hero. He says this is like a really courageous way to go. And it's, he says it's really commendable, and he really, respected the guy, which kind of makes a lot of sense because that's not exactly how Norm went out. Norm, basically just kept pushing and kept working until he died, which is, I mean, if you look, he's actually got tour dates up in San Diego for next month still. It's really fucking insane. I see the value in that. I think it's maybe a little bit idyllic and kind of maybe too poetic for me to want to subscribe to saying that it's courageous and heroic, but at the very least, I think it's certainly his business to not want to, and maybe probably a good thing to not want to put everybody through a decade of wondering when he's going to die. And aside from that, I have a lot of respect for the fact that he's an entertainer, and like, to be perfectly frank, the fact that he never told the public is commendable, I think. Because as an entertainer, he like recognized that his role was just, as an entertainer, was to just like make people happy and make people laugh. And that the trade-off for communicating that to the world would have been maybe a little catharsis for him, maybe a little satisfaction there, maybe a little sympathy from people, but like at the expense of taking up brain space and like heartache of millions of his fans. And that this isn't really a dividend that's worth exchanging, and it's certainly not his place.
Sure.
That's a lot of words. Started a whole conversation about like parasocial relationships and the way that the way that I perceive the way that this should be done, this whole streaming thing. I feel like a lot of people who are streamers are really happy to complain about shit and put their emotional baggage on their viewers and, look for sympathy. And I think that's really disgusting.
I mean, different people work in different ways, honestly. I think that's actually, again, that's another thing. I would have agreed with you. I hate to say I would have agreed with you because it makes it sound like, well, you're too immature.
Hey, you've been doing this a long time. Your insights are valuable. I came to you.
Yeah, no, I would have said that because I am that way. I actually hate sympathy so much. It drives me fucking crazy. But I think that I have like a pretty big work ethic too. Even if it seems like I slack sometimes. Like I worked since I was like 15, 14.
Just say 6. Fuck it. No one's gonna verify it.
Well, yeah, no, but like the I don't like sympathy because I like to work for what I have and I like to do what I do and I like to get credit for like things that I'm proud of. Like if somebody's saying like, oh, like Destiny, like that, like he had a really good debate with that guy, or he won that StarCraft thing or whatever. Like those are the types of things I want. I don't want to be like, oh, Destiny, like, oh yeah, like that guy had a hard life doing this or that. And it's like, oh, okay, like I don't care. Like I don't want that to be like the first thing that comes to your mind. Like it feels like very victimizing, and I never want to be seen that way. And it's super cringe. Or I shouldn't say super cringe. It feels very cringe to me. I don't want that type of attention. But man, I notice, and I call it out more when I see it. I notice that a lot of other people absolutely will reach to whatever dumb shit. You see it a lot with the quote unquote like, oh shit, I don't want to stumble into controversial territory, but like the quote unquote mental illness that happens on Twitter. So you get people like that Katarina girl that will go on shows and say they have like 7 different mental illnesses, and it's like, oh my fucking god. And like this is how people want to be known. Or you get people that will like grossly exaggerate, like, oh yeah, like my life was really poor, like I grew up in like one of the poorer neighborhoods in Beverly Hills or whatever. And it's like, what? Are you serious? Like people will say shit like that, and it's like, wait, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like they want like all the credit for having like a hard upbringing, even though they like did really well. That bothers the fuck out of me. But I think that people want that. People just want like attention and people to care and shit. I think that's just like a natural part of the human experience. And if they're not getting that other ways, yeah. Oh, dude, say something and then I gotta go.
Say something and then oh no, go ahead.
It's a related thing. You know how I get this really strong feeling of this? The place I get this the most. So, have you ever watched those JCS police interrogation videos?
Me?
Yes.
No.
Wait,
why would I watch those?
Okay, fuck you. A lot of people break down like all of the different interrogative techniques that happen in those conversations. But do you know what's probably, in my opinion, do you know what's working the most in these conversations that makes the other person talk so much? I think that for a lot of people that end up in a police interrogation, it's probably one of the first times in their entire life where they've sat across from somebody that is genuinely, incredibly interested in every single fucking word they have to say. And when you give somebody that type of attention, it is unbelievably addicting. Like people absolutely go crazy for that because most people don't have that type of attention in their lives.
People tend to go a couple of different ways with those conversations. People, I think most people, they do kind of, they don't expect to, and they don't do this intentionally, but they do tend to feel like they're suddenly the protagonist of a story, and they get to be the victor that writes their own history. And they end up stepping in a lot of shit because, a lot of times they're saying things that aren't necessarily true. With that whole Catarana situation, I think that was a really good example. You and I talked about that a little bit. One thing I failed to do in that conversation that we had was I failed to give you like a strong counter narrative, and I just made appeals to, like how little empirical evidence we had. And I remember you put a lot of stress on that line that Catarana had in her twitlonger about I had to make a choice between my dignity and my future in streaming or whatever. I think about the fact that she wrote that, and I think about the fact that she very clearly lied to Dylan about the nature of her relationship with Prime, and that she even maintained it long after their stream. And it took a long time. It took Dylan speaking with Prime directly to really be convinced that they had a very close, intimate friendship. It seems kind of clear to me, entertaining the possibility that it's like that she really just wanted people to think after she had been maybe convinced, or maybe after reflecting and being embarrassed about the dynamics of their relationship and their history, that she just wanted to convince people that they really had this employer-employee relationship and nothing else, because that would be more condemning for him. So in the end, she was rewriting history, it seems like, and she was suddenly the author of her own epic. And that's what she got to do with that platform. She ended up saying things that were pretty demonstrably not true. So I think that happens in those interrogations often. And also, people will end up letting details slip while they're rewriting that information, not really understanding that details of their account are going to be compared with the accounts of other people, and compared and contrasted. And people can often let details slip that end up incriminating them as corroborated by other people's accounts as well.
Yeah. This is why I always tell people that, like, because a lot of people romanticize like lying really well or being a good manipulator, blah blah blah, and like you can do that to one person for one event. But the idea that you could make some complicated narrative that spans like days or weeks or months or years and incorporates like multiple people's stories, like that will never happen. That is like some movie shit, because like everything will fall apart. You really only like even one minor lie about like who was where at some point in time can start to unravel everything. Like it's not feasible.
Yep. Especially the more actors involved. I think that's one of the best, I guess, logical ways to reason yourself out of like 9/11 truth conspiracies. There's just too much information in that system for it all to remain cohesive as like a conspiracy for so long,
Or the anti-vax stuff too, yeah. That like every government, every school, all the private organizations across multiple countries are all working together. It's like, who could ever keep that secret? Like that's unreal,
If there's one thing that's consistent across the entire political spectrum of like dumbass ideologues on these platforms, it's a refusal to really acknowledge that the world we live in is a world of competing nations. Maybe not every nation, maybe not every action is driven by competition. I'm sure there's a lot of cooperation that goes on between countries, but yeah, like I really do think that that's a kill shot to the argument that it's some grand Illuminati conspiracy or something like that. Like there's no way China's going to work with the US to fucking distribute a bunk, vaccine or something. There's no way Russia is going to work with anyone on fucking anything. There's no way Iran and the US are going to strike a deal. Hey, let's distribute this fake vaccine to fucking control people. That's just not going to happen.
And even one step further, and a lot of people have a really hard time understanding this. Actually, nobody would believe this, but I'll say it anyway. As all of these bodies that you're talking about are made up of humans, and it takes a lot for a human to be like genuinely malicious or evil. That is a very difficult thing to do, and most people are not like that. It is exceedingly rare to find somebody that will do things that is actually like in the counter interest to other parties, unless they've got like a big motivation to do so. And all of these organizations at the end of the day are filled with like other human beings. So the idea that like all of this horrible shit is happening and nobody's leaking it, nobody's reporting it across like tens or hundreds of thousands of people, like no fucking shot. There's no way. Like something, we would have something more concrete than like posts on InfoWars,
We might disagree a little bit, at least in terms of individuals. I think individuals tend to be very good about excusing themselves from doing things that they would condemn in other people.
I agree with that,
You know?
but what I mean is that like when I look to, so when people ask me like, or because me and Melina talk about this a lot or whatever, right? Like, oh, well, like why do people do things, blah 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 blah. I think that I would say that 98% of the time somebody does something bad towards somebody else or to another actor is because they're just acting selfishly. Like that's it. But to actually like with no personal gain do something like horrible or evil to another person, I think is like that is an almost impossible thing to do. I think that like usually you just kind of like look where the incentives are. I guess that sounds a little bit contradictory to what I said before, because theoretically people will say like, oh well, actually they've got a self-interest to create like the new world order or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess if you go like really deep there, but I think that like there have been like so many whistleblowers throughout all of mankind. Like if governments are really doing like really crazy fucked up shit, like usually we find out, or I mean it seems to be the case that like a lot of stuff has come public. And then as you said before, the more and more people that you bring together on these projects, like the likelihood of something leaking, it like increases exponentially with every new party added, you know?
Yeah, so in the case of this vaccine stuff, I did catch that conversation you had with that right winger who believed in, I guess like his epistemological reasoning for why he was an anti-vaxxer was because he believed in some, crazy New World Order conspiracy theory because of one line in some book from the 80s or 90s about how a pandemic or a super virus might be used to cull the herd and like promote do some fucking like neo-Darwinian shit or something. And you started asking him about epistemology, and I became really, really interested in this conversation at this point because I do think it's difficult to reconcile the fact that everything you know about the vaccine and the virus is on the deference of somebody else's greater expertise. And he's claiming basically the same thing, but the difference between whom the two of you are deferring to is a matter of reasoning. And I'm not sure if that's ever going to be sufficient. This isn't criticism, by the way, because I don't know what the answer to this is. I do think thinking about epistemology and like having a handle on that and like having better epistemological reasoning for like arriving to your positions and your conclusions and like whom you're fucking going to be able to relay information such that you can understand it is like the most important consideration to make when you're trying to learn things and know things. But
and even when I'm like
really convincing.
When I'm challenging somebody on epistemic grounds, it's not I'm not looking for like coherent like theories of truth or like some crazy philosophical understanding. Usually I'm just curious that when I don't know if I use that word. I try to stay away from using like philosophy terms in conversations because usually it just comes across as being like intimidating. But like I'm really just curious, like how do you decide what is real or true? That's like the question. That's why like my favorite part of it, and I want to do this more with people in the future, is like if you believe something and I think it's crazy, how about like I just want to watch you Google it and like let's look around and see like how do you figure out like what you think is true or not true about a given thing? Because that process is really interesting to me. Like what are you searching for and what articles are coming up that convince you of what you believe? That's the process that I like to watch. Yeah.
Oof, but I can already think of so many holes I would poke in that if I were on the other side, And from the perspective of that conservative kid, his reasoning to him seemed sound, and it trumped your reasoning. Why do I believe this? Because this guy did let it leak that this New World Order conspiracy was happening, and like that trumps your appeal to what the current institutions are because they're doing it in secret. So naturally the current institutions are,
and that is true. But like, if I really wanted to like go into the weeds on, or not even into the weeds, if I really wanted to get foundational or fundamental in those things, we could start having other types of conversations about like, okay, well, let's say that one line was enough to convince you there. Like, well, what about people that believe that this one line convinces them that? Or what about like Islamists that are convinced by Muhammad that they should be engaging in like these like these jihads or whatever? Like who's like I need something more than that one line. Otherwise, I need to find out why is your one line for conspiracy? Why is that more accurate or more descriptive of the world than anyone else's one line? Right? It's kind of like an atheist versus religion argument, right? Like, oh well, if you have faith for this, well, what about that guy that has faith for that? Like, how do you deny that? And I think that, like I said, none of these are, to be clear, none of these are like debate destroyed wins, because nobody's going to flip their entire like epistemic foundational view of the world immediately. I think it's more just to start the questioning process, and then more just to kind of illustrate to other people. It's like, okay, well, it's cool that you believe in this whole conspiracy because of this one paragraph, but like I could make like 50 million conspiracies out of one paragraph. Like we need something more.
Yeah, I do think that is valuable, and I think you're right. I think the value of debate is often like reduced to whether or not somebody changes their mind at the end of it, but that's never reasonable. Yeah. Like opening the door ought to be the end goal at the end of a debate. Sometimes that's the best you can shoot for. And then it's a matter of time after that. I mean, I can certainly think about a lot of positions that I've changed over the years that took me years to change, but had that door not been opened by somebody presenting like good arguments, it may never have come.
Yeah, same. I felt that way so much. I'm glad that I changed a lot and that I wasn't the same type of person my whole life. Like, I'm glad that I started off more socially, I'm never really socially conservative one that was on the internet, but definitely more like gamer-bro-y. I'm glad that I had that journey because I can empathize a lot with how some people are on the internet. Like, when I was, like, back a long time ago, I would defend the use of, like, slurs and everything. But my argument was always that, like, yeah, I don't think it's a big deal because, like, I'm not racist. Like, I'm not, like, homophobic, so like, I don't think it matters if I say these things. But every time people fought with me, the attack was always like, Destiny, you are a racist. You are homophobic. And, like, I know that I'm not, so, like, why the fuck would I even listen to what you have to say, right? And it took a long time, unfortunately, where I had to, like, personally discover and grow out of these things and have experiences, because all of the people on the outside that would attack me over it, their attacks were just so off. Like, I know that I don't hate gay people. I know that I don't hate black people. Like, why should I listen to you if you're going to start the conversation off calling me a racist homophobe, you know?
Yeah, I had the exact same journey. Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing video games as well and computer games.
Yeah.
And holy shit, like, yeah, PC games and shit was the worst. And you know, I used to post on forums where, like, it was mandatory. You had to fucking say the N-word as part of the joke. It was the funniest thing, shocking humor, all the slurs. And yeah, we kind of operated under this sort of free speech absolutism that we were actually, like, liberating the use of these terms by normalizing. It was really silly. But yeah, it was similar. Like, anybody who saw that would be like, hey man, that's kind of fucked up and racist. Be like, yeah, but we know it's not racist. We're just like, we're actually even lampooning, you know, this language, and people who really feel this way. We're like satirizing people who actually use these terms, you know, unironically or whatever. I had a very similar journey. And, you know, I do remember, I can think of a piece of rhetoric that you once laid out where you came, like, the whole reason you ever started debating had nothing to do with being like a political ideologue or a champion for, like, you know, a team or anything like that. It was simply just a matter of people were making suboptimal arguments, or people's argumentation was just generally really bad in most of these spaces. Is that?
Yeah, that was it. I was like, oh, I think I can contribute more to these conversations. They all suck. All these conversations are horrible. Yeah.
Damn. Wow, we covered a lot today.